What's up? Welcome to Rebel Fantasy Football. I'm your host, Jacob Stuckey, and welcome to this week's bonus episode. Hope you guys are having a good weekend. I'm doing this episode because I want to go over draft strategies. I know a lot of you guys are probably drafting this weekend or maybe early next week. And I've had a lot of people reach out and ask, hey, Jacob, like, how do you prepare for a draft? What are you looking at when you go into a draft? And so that's what I want to go over this episode. There are a lot of different strategies that you can use. If you type in fantasy football on Google, you're probably seeing a lot of different strategies come up. And I think there are some that I would recommend over others. But I'm going to kind of go over several, give you an idea of what you can do, and then I'm going to go over what I would recommend doing. But before I get into the strategies, I think the first thing to keep in mind is you always want to look at the best player available. And so don't go into a draft with a specific strategy and don't tunnel vision on that strategy, because that can often hurt you. If you reach for a guy that you could have got a lot later, where a better player was on the board, but you missed it because you're going with a strategy, you're going to kind of regret that later. And so always look for the best player available, and always be willing to change up your strategy when you're in the middle of a draft. It can be a lot different doing a mock draft online with computers than playing with your buddies that are probably trying to mess with you. So keep that in mind. And let me know if you guys have any questions with the mock drafts I'm going to show you. And just also note that these mock drafts I'm showing you, I did on Sleeper, and I did them against computers. So the draft positions in which some of these players were taken are probably going to look different than your actual live drafts. But this at least gives you an idea of different strategies you can use and where players are sometimes going. So first one I'm going to go over is essentially for a full PPR league, and that's prioritizing wide receivers. This is a variation of the no running back strategy, which I would not recommend. Some people will literally draft 7-8 wide receivers in a row, and then you're left with scraps at running back. But this strategy is utilizing prioritizing wide receivers with the belief that in full PPR leagues, getting a bonus point, 1 full point per reception, is more valuable than prioritizing running backs who may not catch the ball as much as a wide receiver. So in this one, I'm drafting at the 10 spot, and I basically said, okay, I'm going to draft 4 wide receivers in a row. And now this is based off who's available at the time. And so if I'm in an actual draft and I get to the 310 spot and I've already had 2 wide receivers drafted, but I have the mindset that I'm going to do the 4 wide receivers in a row strategy, but then say maybe there's a running back I like better, I would recommend going for that running back in the 3rd round than just sticking with your strategy because you want it to be cool. But this is a strategy that you can utilize. You're basically saying, okay, I'm going to get the strongest wide receivers available in the first 4 rounds, and then I'm going to go for those mid-round running backs with the hope that they can return a lot of upside. So first round, I got Devontae Adams. My second pick, I got Tyreek Hill. And then for 3rd and 4th, I got T. Higgins and Deontay Johnson. And then in the 5th and the 6th round, I was able to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire and A.J. Dillon as my running back 1 and 2. Now, obviously, this is not great. Like, your top running back is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. For some people, they would hate this. They would hate the uncertainty of not having a strong running back. You're basically saying, I know my running backs can suck, but I feel pretty good about my wide receivers, which is true. The wide receivers in this scenario are really strong. But I don't blame you for not wanting to risk it and go for the strategy, because it does feel risky. So basically the next pick, you can continue going running back if you want. You can go a quarterback if you want an earlier quarterback. I decided to get another wide receiver in Gabe Davis just because I really liked his value here at the end of the 7th round. But you can go for a quarterback, you can go for a tight end, but or another running back. It just kind of depends on value, I would say. Next up for the eighth and the ninth rounds, I got two more running backs, Chase Edmonds and Ramondre Stevenson, who I really like. I think both of them can return a lot of value and a lot of upside. And so I actually really like those two players for my bench. If anything happens to CEH on the Chiefs, I can plug one of these guys in there and I would feel not like amazing with them, obviously, as like my RB1. But you're basically prioritizing the strong wide receivers with the hope that your running backs can get you points based off receptions. I would never do this strategy for standard. I would only do this for probably full PPR, and even half PPR, I probably wouldn't do it. And then you get Kirk Cousins as your quarterback later on, and then you get two more wide receivers and then a tight end and Austin Hooper. So obviously, like, this team is risky. I don't love this team. I probably wouldn't use this strategy myself. I definitely would be tempted to, but if I'm getting two wide receivers in the first and second round, I would probably take a running back at least in the third or the fourth. But it depends on who you like. If you don't like Travis Etienne, if you don't like David Montgomery or Cam Akers as your RB1, if you would rather have a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, then go for it. I would say shoot your shot with that. But that's what this strategy does. You can always make changes to it if you want to do a variation of it. Don't go in with the mindset of it has to look like this. It's just an idea. Next up is a strategy specifically for standard leagues that don't have the bonus for a full point reception or a half point reception. I used to play in this format. This was the format of my main league until we swapped to full PPR. And in this format, you definitely want to prioritize running backs. They are the ones that get you the most consistent points because you're not going to want to prioritize a guy like Keenan Allen that gets like 10 catches a game because he's not going to get you those 10 extra points. He may still get you a lot of points if he has a lot of yards and several touchdowns, but he's not going to be as valuable as he would be in a full point per reception league. So in this strategy, I basically did the opposite of the four wide receivers. I said, okay, let's prioritize running backs. So I drafted at the 12th spot. I got Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, and Travis Etienne right off the bat. Cam Akers sometimes goes earlier than this spot. So if you come in the scenario and you're thinking that you're going to get a wide receiver at the end of the third round, but then you're like, oh, I really like this running back that's still available, I would say go ahead and take him. Just because you have two running backs already doesn't mean that you can't get another one. But you need to have the belief in the later round wide receivers. Because if you don't, if you hate the wide receivers that you can get later on, you're probably not going to like your team. I happen to actually really like the wide receivers that I got on this mock draft. And so I was cool with it. I got four running backs right off the bat. And then when it came back to me at the end of the fifth, I got Brandon Cooks, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then in the seventh and the eighth rounds, I got Smith on the Eagles and Elijah Moore on the Jets. And so that honestly is not that bad. You basically have two running backs in your starting positions, two running backs in your flex, and then you have two starting wide receivers and two wide receivers on the bench. If anything happens to one of your running backs, like Cam Akers or Travis Etienne, say one of them gets hurt, you can always plug in Devonta Smith on the Eagles or Elijah Moore and put him in at that second flex spot. And I think that would be pretty solid. And then you're taking a quarterback and Derek Carr at the end of the ninth. I generally don't reach for quarterbacks. Some people do. But I am a firm believer that the value you can get in a late quarterback is better taking than reaching for a guy that may not do like a ton more. So for example, let's take this example. We have, I got Derek Carr at the end of the ninth. and Russell Wilson went at the end of the 7th. So he went 2 rounds earlier than Derek Carr. I personally do not think that Russell is going to do much better than Derek Carr this year. I think Derek Carr could do better than Russell, but I definitely don't think that Russell is going to get 100 more points than Derek Carr. And so with this belief, I'm basically saying I would rather strengthen my wide receiver position that is already really weak and get Derek Carr in the 9th than reach for Russell at the end of the 7th and then get lesser players at wide receiver or running back. So I would ask yourself that question. Do you value some of these quarterbacks more than the ones you can get in the later rounds? Or do you think it's worth it getting another wide receiver or another running back in these middle rounds? I think that is a question that everyone should ask themselves before they go into a draft, because a lot of the times people who haven't done their research or haven't thought about it before they draft, they reach for a quarterback or they reach for a tight end instead of prioritizing a wide receiver or a running back and then getting a tight end later on, or at least a couple rounds later, who may end up finishing better than those earlier ones. So no, that's a lot of words I just kind of spewed. It's kind of an interesting topic. I love talking about it though, because I know some people have different philosophies. Some people are very much about the mindset of, no, like I have to fill my quarterback, my running back, my wide receiver, my tight end right away. So I have to go 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, quarterback, tight end. But then your bench space is really weak. And I just highly don't recommend that. I think you're making your team really bad, because if you have one of your solid running backs get hurt, you're going to have no one to replace him. And so I'm very much of the belief that you can get a lot of value in the quarterback and the tight end position later on, and you don't have to feel like you have to reach for it. So that's kind of all I have to say for now on that. I'm sure I'll talk about it more later. But next up is kind of a bit of both. I went over prioritizing wide receivers and running backs. And so this strategy is basically taking best player available, and we're going to take both wide receiver and running back early. I'm drafting at the 7 spot, as you guys can see. So I get Justin Jefferson at the 1-7, which is awesome. The reason why I did this in this scenario is because the top 5 running backs went off the board in basically the 1st through the 5th spot. And then Cooper Kupp got taken at the 1-6. If you guys watch my wide receiver rankings, I have Justin Jefferson ranked as the top wide receiver. And so for me, I'm like, steal. I get him at the 1-7, comes back around to me at the 2-6. And in this scenario, I could have went Kelsey, which I don't think is bad. But I don't love the running backs that are normally available around here. And so then I said, okay, I like Aaron Jones a lot, so I'm going to take him at that 2-6. Comes back around. Normally, I would look for a wide receiver. I happen to really like Ezekiel Elliott. I think he's a good value. And normally, Zeke goes around like over here, but he fell to me at the 3-7. So I said, okay, let's take Zeke. So I got Zeke in the 3-7, comes back around to me at the 4-6. And now normally you're like, oh, I need a wide receiver really bad. But you already have Justin Jefferson. And if you believe, like I do, that there are strong wide receivers later, then you're okay looking for another running back. And so I like Travis Etienne. I think he's a good value, kind of in this middle of the 4th, late 4th. Sometimes he gets taken early 4th or late 3rd, so I expected him to be taken around here. But he falls to me at the 4-6, so I take him there. And now I'm like, okay, I got 3 solid running backs and a really strong wide receiver. I need more wide receivers. Comes back at the 5-7. I love Mike Williams this year. I'm really high on him. And so that was an easy decision for that pick. Next up at the 6-6 spot, I take Amon-Ra St. Brown on the Lions. I really like him as well. And then it comes back to me at the 7-7. You can often look for a quarterback here. You basically already have 3 wide receivers and 3 running backs. You can look for a tight end if you want. But I decided to basically pursue value. I said, no, Hunter Renfrow is available. I really like his value in the middle of the 7th. I'm going to take him. So I take Renfrow. Next up, then I'm looking for a quarterback. Dak Prescott was still available at the 8-6, so that was a no-brainer in my mind. And then I'm still taking wide receivers because I already have 3 strong running backs. And so this is basically a strategy that is wide receiver heavy in the middle rounds, especially because I took 3 strong, solid starting running backs in 3 out of the first 4 rounds. And then I finished my draft with getting 2 more strong depth pieces at running back, Isaiah Spiller, and then the rookie on the Falcons, Algier. And then I finished with getting a tight end and Hayden Hurst. If you watch my tight end rankings, I like Hayden Hurst as a huge sleeper this year. And so I was okay with basically taking him as my last pick because that allowed me to prioritize value at the running back and the wide receiver positions. But if you don't feel as strongly as I do about strengthening your bench, you could have taken like Dallas Goedert at the 7-7 instead of Hunter Renfrow. But you're just sacrificing the value and the depth piece you could have got in that. So, but yeah, that's a strategy that you can definitely utilize. I would recommend leaning towards this strategy as far as having an open mind. Don't go in like I've been talking about. Don't go in with a tunnel vision. Keep an open mind of the best players available and be willing to switch up your strategy. So next up, this is one that I really like to use. I prioritize this one in a lot of my drafts, especially my full PPR drafts. I utilized this last year and it worked out for me. But there are some changes that I feel like I should have made, and I will explain those. So this is the hero RB strategy. Basically, it's the belief that you're going to get a really strong running back in the first round, the first or the second round, and then you're just going to build around him with strong wide receivers. So I'm drafting at the 2 spot here. And I was able to get Jonathan Taylor. For whatever reason, the computer drafted Austin Eckler at the number 1 spot, which isn't likely. That's probably not going to happen in your draft. But often Christian McCaffrey can go 1-1, so sometimes Jonathan Taylor is available. But I would take Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey at the spot. And then basically right after that, I'm just stacking wide receivers. So I go Jonathan Taylor, and then I go Mike Evans and AJ Brown, which was like a steal to me. That was like AJ Brown at the 3-2. I thought that was awesome. And then comes back around to me, and I'm able to get Jalen Waddle and Allen Robinson. And so I have a really strong running back in Jonathan Taylor. And then I have 4 starting wide receivers in Mike Evans, AJ Brown, Jalen Waddle, and Allen Robinson. I love that already. Like, that to me is a great start. If you can start like that in your leagues, I would do that 100% of the time, to be honest. I think that's already a great team. Next up, when it comes to the 6th round, you want to be looking for a running back. The mistake I made last year is I actually drafted at the spot. I drafted at the 2 spot, and I made the mistake of continuing to draft wide receivers to strengthen my bench instead of drafting an RB2 at the 6th or the 7th round. So if there truly are no running backs that you like here, then you can try that. You can try to draft more wide receivers to strengthen your bench, but you're going to end up really hurting for running backs later on. Also, keep in mind that this strategy is not a strategy that you can just draft and then forget about. You really need to be very active in your league if you try this strategy out. You're going to have to be willing to trade. You're going to have to be willing to check the waiver wire every day. I experienced that last year where for my RB2, I was really hurting. I drafted Hines on the Colts, who wasn't doing very well for me last year. And then my RB1 was Derrick Henry. And then Derrick Henry got hurt. And then I was really screwed because I had no one else. And so I had to trade. I had to look for the waiver wire. But I was really struggling when Derrick Henry got hurt. So the strategy is definitely around this top running back. So if your top running back gets hurt and you don't have that RB depth, you're going to really be in trouble. You're going to have to basically figure out how you're going to fix that big hole. But in this scenario, I'm looking at a running back at the end of the 6th. But what I do instead is I actually draft D-Hop. D-Hop fell to me at the 6-11, which I didn't think he was going to. And I was like, man, how cool would that be? Have D-Hop coming off the bench once he's done with the suspension. I also like A.J. Dillon better than Miles Sanders and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which is what Team 1 took. And so I was still able to get A.J. Dillon at the 7-2, which in my mind, I'm super happy with that because I love A.J. Dillon as an RB2. I think he's going to do really well. And so, yeah, I was cool with that. I like that pick. Comes back around to me at the 8-11, and then I'm looking for a quarterback. You don't have to take a quarterback if you like some of the later guys, but Matt Stafford fell to me at the 8-11. So that was a no-brainer to me. I already got my RB2, and so I took Matt Stafford. And then in the 9-2 spot, I took Melvin Gordon. So now I'm looking to strengthen my RB2 spot. I took Melvin Gordon. Comes back around to me at 10-11. I take Hines again, which I hope, if this was a real league, I would really hope that he wouldn't bite me again this year. But took Hines again, and then I finished the draft with 2 more wide receivers in Pickens and Tolbert, and then I draft Hayden Hurst with the last pick. You could have taken another running back at the 11-2 instead of Pickens. I like his value a lot. And my thought process was, if I take George Pickens and he does really well, I can always trade him for a running back. I really like trading. And so I'm always looking for value that I can get later on to hopefully strengthen my weakest position, which in this scenario is the running back position. So yeah, that's Hero RB at the 2 spot. Another example of this is drafting at the 4 spot. And this is one that I am kind of tweaking with this year, is actually getting a tight end early. And so at the 1-4 spot, I get Derrick Henry. And then at the second round, I was able to get Mark Andrews. And so I got Mark Andrews. And then in the 3rd round, I got Keenan Allen as my wide receiver 1. And so this is kind of a well-rounded start. You get Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, and Keenan Allen. But then I'm going wide receiver heavy. I get Deontay Johnson and Allen Robinson. And then I get Brandon Cooks and I get D-Hop again. So then I draft, basically, I do a running back, tight end, and then 5 wide receivers. But then I'm hurting on RB2 at this point. And so then my next pick, I take Chase Edmonds as my RB2, and then I get more reinforcement with Melvin Gordon. Similar to the last one, I'm looking for those guys that have upside at the running back position, to where Melvin Gordon, if Javonte Williams gets hurt, Melvin Gordon is automatically the RB1. Chase Edmonds is looking like the starting running back for the Dolphins. It's a little iffy right now, but he does have a lot of upside, especially for a guy that you can draft at the end of the 8th. I also take George Pickens in this one. And then for my quarterback, I'm taking him a lot later. I'm taking Tua. And so if you're drafting a tight end early, I would recommend not drafting a quarterback early as well. You kind of have to choose one or the other, in my opinion. And so that's what I did for this one. I drafted Mark Andrews, and then I drafted Tua late. And then I finished with Dotson at wide receiver. And then I got Mostert, who essentially, if my opinion on this was, okay, if Edmonds gets hurt, I can draft Mostert as kind of a handcuff. I don't normally draft handcuffs, but I think in this scenario, looking for that RB2 and hoping that, okay, if someone gets hurt, I need to fix that position. You can draft a handcuff in that scenario. So this is another example of the hero RB. And then the last example which is also for Hero RB. But last example is drafting at the 11 spot. This is actually a spot that I am drafting from in one of my leagues. So I've done a lot of preparation for this spot, which is why I wanted to share it, because I have been pretty happy with how this has turned out. So similar to the last spot I showed you with Hero RB, I draft Alvin Kamara at the 111, and then I draft Devontae Adams at the 2-2, and then at the 311 I get George Kittle, which I think is a steal. I think if George Kittle falls to the end of the third, early fourth, I would take him. I wouldn't take him if you have 2 running backs or 2 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. But if you have a versatile start of running back, wide receiver, or wide receiver, running back, I would take George Kittle at the end of the third. So I have, Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams, George Kittle for my start. And then I go Jalen Waddle, Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper. So I have, at this point, the first 6 rounds, I have Kamara, RB1, George Kittle, top tight end, and I have my 4 wide receivers, which is awesome. That's a pretty good start. And now, instead of what I did the last 2 scenarios I showed you, I actually went RB2 and running back bench. I went Kareem Hunt for my RB2, and then I got Patterson to back him up on the bench, which I think is really solid. You're basically, it's a little more secure at running back for this scenario. If someone gets hurt or if Kamara actually does get suspended, you at least have a running back that can definitely be utilized in Hunt or Patterson. Then I'm looking for a little bit wide receiver bench space. I got Robert Woods and Chase Claypool, which I think is a pretty good shot, especially at the early 10th round. Chase Claypool, that's not bad. Some people don't love him, but I think if you can get him at that value, I would do it. And then the main issue with this team is going to be my quarterback. I really like Kirk Cousins in the later round, but Kirk Cousins actually got taken in the early 11th in this draft, and so I had to take Justin Fields at the 11-11. I think looking back on it, I would maybe take Derek Carr at the 10-2 instead of Claypool, but I just went ahead and I took Fields later on. And then I got another running back in Ronald Jones at the 12-2, and then I finished with getting Pierce on the Colts at my last pick. So this team's not bad. This is kind of what I'm looking at doing in my actual draft coming up next week. I'm looking at definitely getting a strong running back and then just prioritizing wide receivers, but also looking for that George Kittle at the end of the third. Another kind of version of this, if George Kittle's gone, I'm going wide receiver. And then in the 6th round, I'm looking for Hawkinson. So I want to get a tight end in my first 6 picks. If that doesn't happen, then I'm sacrificing tight end and I'm getting a tight end later on in like Hurst or Austin Hooper. But if I can get George Kittle at the end of the 3rd or Hawkinson the end of the 6th, I'm looking for that. Because the other alternative is if you want to get a second running back early on, you're looking at guys that in my mind, I don't think is worth it. Like you're looking at a J.K. Dobbins or like a Miles Sanders, which in my mind, I would rather just wait to get a Kareem Hunt for my RB2. It's kind of how I feel. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at doing. Let me know if you guys have any questions with that. I love preparing for drafts. I think it's super fun. It's a big part of fantasy that I love doing just because there's so many different strategies that you can use. And so if you guys have any questions, let me know. If you have a draft coming up tomorrow or next week and you need help for that, message me. I would love to help you prep going into it. Just let me know what format you're doing and what spot you're drafting at, and players that you like. And I can definitely help you kind of create like a mock idea and a mock strategy to go into your draft. So next up, I'm going to go over my quarterback rankings on my next week's episode. And so let me know if you guys disagree with me on any of these strategies. Let me know which strategy you're using and why. and we'll see you guys next time.